My name is Jane, and after 45 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage, I discovered my husband Brian had been having an affair with my best friend Dorothy. The betrayal cut deep, especially after decades of building a life together. They planned their future using our joint savings, but what they didn't know was that I had protected myself with offshore accounts they couldn't touch. Let me tell you how their scheme fell apart. Before I begin my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to protect yourself from someone you trusted. Our life seemed perfect. Brian and I had built what I believed was the American dream over 45 years together. We met during our sophomore year at Northwestern University back in 1978. I was studying finance while he was pursuing his doctorate in literature. We were young, ambitious, and hopelessly in love. "You'll be my financial wizard, and I'll be your literary guide through life," Brian would say with that charming smile that made my heart flutter even decades later. After graduation, I secured a position at an international financial firm while Brian became a university professor. We bought our first home in a quiet Chicago suburb 3 years later and started our family soon after. Our daughter Sarah came first, followed by our son Michael 2 years later. Throughout our marriage, I climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior financial advisor specializing in international investments. Brian supported my career, proudly telling everyone about my accomplishments. At least that's what I thought. "Jane has the financial brains in this family," he would tell our friends at dinner parties. "I just teach students about dead poets." Dorothy entered our lives during college too. We were roommates junior year, and she quickly became my closest friend. She stood beside me at our wedding, helped me through both pregnancies, and was there for every major milestone in our lives. She never married, instead focusing on her career as an art curator. I always admired her independence and passion for art. "Some people find their soulmate in a romantic partner," she once told me. "I found mine in friendship with you, Jane." Those words now leave a bitter taste in my mouth. As the years passed, our children grew up, graduated college, and started families of their own. Sarah became a doctor and gave us 2 grandchildren, Emma and Jack. Michael went into technology and had a daughter named Lily with his wife Amanda. Family gatherings were always filled with laughter and love. Brian was the proud grandfather who spoiled the kids with books and stories. By the time our 45th anniversary approached, we had accumulated significant wealth. Our primary home was fully paid off. We owned a vacation property in Florida and had healthy retirement accounts. Brian was preparing to retire from his position as department chair, and I had already stepped back from full-time work, taking on only a few select clients. What no one knew, not even Brian, was that I had established several offshore accounts over the years. This wasn't due to any nefarious purpose, but came from professional wisdom. Throughout my career in finance, I had witnessed too many women lose everything in late-life divorces. Colleagues who had contributed equally to family finances for decades suddenly found themselves financially vulnerable when their marriages ended. Always have your own safety net. My first boss, a divorced woman in her 60s, had advised me, "Love with your heart, but protect yourself with your head." I took that advice seriously, gradually building my separate financial security. These accounts contained about 30% of my personal earnings over the years, money that I had carefully invested and grown. I never thought I'd need this protection from Brian, but wisdom had taught me that even the strongest marriages could sometimes fail. Looking back, there were subtle signs of trouble that I chose to ignore. Brian had become more distant, spending increased time on campus. He checked his phone more frequently and often stepped out of rooms to take calls. His interest in our intimate life had waned, which I attributed to age and the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. Dorothy was visiting more often, always asking about Brian's schedule and seeming particularly interested in our retirement plans. I thought she was just being a caring friend concerned about our future happiness. "You two are my model for the perfect marriage," she would say. "I want to make sure you enjoy your golden years to the fullest." How foolish I was to believe her. The first clear sign that something was amiss came about 6 months before our 45th anniversary. Brian had always been a creature of habit, but suddenly his routines changed. He began working late at the university 2 or 3 nights a week, claiming he needed to mentor struggling graduate students. The department is understaffed, he explained when I questioned the new schedule. These kids need guidance, and as department chair, it falls on me. It seemed reasonable given his dedication to his students over the years. But then came the weekend academic conferences that appeared with increasing frequency on his calendar. It's important for me to stay visible in academic circles before retirement, he insisted. These connections will help recommend my replacement. Around this same time, Dorothy began stopping by more often on days when Brian wasn't home. She would bring coffee or pastries saying she was just in the neighborhood or wanted some girl time. During these visits, she would casually inquire about Brian's schedule. Is Brian at another conference this weekend? She would ask innocently. He's so dedicated to his work. You must miss him when he's gone so much. For our 45th anniversary, Dorothy insisted on organizing a surprise party for us. She reserved a private room at our favorite restaurant and invited close friends and family. What strikes me now is how distant Brian seemed that evening. When our son Michael toasted our milestone, Brian's smile didn't reach his eyes. To 45 years of partnership, Michael said, raising his glass, and to many more years of happiness for you both. Brian nodded and clinked glasses with me, but something felt hollow in the gesture. Later, when Dorothy presented us with a photo album she had created chronicling our years together, Brian barely glanced at it before excusing himself to take a phone call. Work never stops even on anniversaries, he joked to our guests, but I felt a pang of disappointment that he couldn't disconnect for this special occasion. A few weeks after the party, I was using Brian's tablet to look up a recipe when a text notification appeared on the screen. It was from Dorothy. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place. I felt a momentary unease but dismissed it. They were old friends too, and perhaps they were planning something for my upcoming birthday. Then came the credit card statement with charges I couldn't account for. A jewelry purchase from an upscale store for $1,700, yet I had received no such gift. When I casually mentioned it, Brian claimed it was a retirement gift for a colleague that the department had asked him to purchase. They trusted my taste, he said with a shrug. You know how hopeless academics can be about these things. Our children began noticing changes in their father, too. During a Sunday dinner, Sarah pulled me aside after Brian had been particularly distracted. Is Dad okay? She asked. He seems somewhere else entirely. He's just preoccupied with retirement planning, I assured her, trying to convince myself as much as her. Michael noticed too, commenting that Brian had canceled their monthly golf game 3 times in a row. Dad's never skipped our tradition before, he said with concern. Even when he had the flu last year, he insisted on at least having lunch at the clubhouse. I made excuses for Brian to our children, but privately my concerns grew. One night, I woke at 3 a.m. to find Brian's side of the bed empty. I went downstairs and found him sitting in the dark scrolling through his phone. When he noticed me, he quickly put the phone face down. Just checking some work emails, he said. Couldn't sleep. The next day, I saw a notification on his phone from a real estate agency. When I asked about it, he claimed he was just helping a colleague look for property in the area. That night, lying awake beside my snoring husband of 45 years, I made the decision to find out what was really happening. A voice in my head told me I wouldn't like what I discovered, but not knowing had become more painful than any truth could be. After weeks of growing suspicion, I did something I never imagined doing in my marriage. I hired a private investigator, a referral from a client whose divorce I had helped navigate financially. Her name was Teresa, a retired police detective who now specialized in infidelity cases. I've been married 45 years, I told her, embarrassed to even be sitting in her office. This feels ridiculous. Mrs. Henderson, I've seen marriages of 50-plus years where partners still kept secrets, she said matter-of-factly. Length of marriage doesn't guarantee honesty. For 2 weeks, Teresa followed Brian whenever he claimed to be working late or attending conferences. On day 16 of the surveillance, my phone rang while I was preparing dinner. "Mrs. Henderson, I think you should come to my office tomorrow morning. I have something to show you." That night was one of the longest of my life. I barely slept watching Brian sleep peacefully beside me, wondering if this would be one of our last nights together. How could someone sleep so soundly while betraying a 45-year relationship the next morning? After Brian left for what he called a faculty breakfast, I drove to Teresa's office. She had a folder waiting on her desk and a sympathetic expression that told me everything before I even opened it. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Inside were dozens of photos. Brian and Dorothy entering a condominium building I didn't recognize. Brian and Dorothy at restaurants holding hands across tables. Brian and Dorothy kissing in his car. And most damning, Brian and Dorothy emerging from a jewelry store, the same one that had appeared on our credit card statement. "The condo belongs to a friend of Dorothy's who spends winters in Arizona," Teresa explained. "They've been meeting there regularly for at least the 2 weeks I've been watching, but based on how comfortable they seem, I guess this has been going on much longer." My hands trembled as I flipped through the evidence of my husband's betrayal with my best friend. 45 years of trust shattered in an instant. "There's something else," Teresa said, sliding a USB drive across the desk. "I was able to access some of their text communications. You might want privacy for this part." She left the room as I plugged the drive into her computer. The screen filled with hundreds of text exchanges between Brian and Dorothy, going back over 3 years. I read with growing horror as their relationship evolved from friendly messages to explicit declarations of love and detailed accounts of their intimate encounters. But what truly broke me were the messages discussing their future plans. They had been plotting to wait until after Brian's retirement, when most of our assets would be consolidated for easier management. "Jane always handles the finances, so she'll have everything organized neatly for us," Brian had written. "Once the retirement accounts are settled and the house is sold, we'll have plenty to start our new life." Dorothy had replied, "I feel terrible deceiving her, but we've waited so long for our chance. 3 more months, and we can finally be together openly." They had even discussed which property they would keep, deciding our Florida vacation home would be perfect for them, while suggesting I could have the primary residence as a fair split. I sat there for hours reading through 3 years of betrayal. The private conversations between my husband and my best friend revealed not just an affair, but a calculated plan to ensure they received the largest possible share of our marital assets. One exchange particularly stung. Dorothy had written, "Do you think she suspects anything?" Brian responded, "Jane trusts too easily. She still believes I'm at academic conferences. Besides, she's too focused on managing our retirement funds to notice what's happening right under her nose." The cruel irony was that while they plotted to take advantage of my financial management, they had no idea about the offshore accounts I had established. In their scheme to secure their future with my money, they had overlooked the fact that I had protected myself years ago without even knowing I would need such protection. As I drove home, a strange calm replaced my initial shock. The double betrayal from the 2 people I trusted most was devastating, but I also felt an odd sense of gratitude for my financial foresight. Had I not established those separate accounts, I would have been completely vulnerable to their scheme. That night, Brian came home late again, offering the same tired excuse about student meetings. I served dinner as usual, making small talk about our upcoming retirement plans, all while knowing that his version of those plans included Dorothy, not me. "I was thinking we should meet with our financial advisor next week," he said, trying to sound casual. "Start the process of consolidating our accounts for retirement." I nodded and smiled, already formulating my plan. A week after receiving the devastating evidence, I decided it was time for a confrontation. I invited Dorothy over for Sunday brunch, telling her Brian would be home and we wanted to discuss retirement travel plans. She arrived bearing pastries and wearing the gold necklace I now knew Brian had bought her with our joint credit card. Jane, it's always so wonderful to see you, she gushed, embracing me as she had for decades. I hugged her back mechanically, wondering how she could be so convincing after betraying 45 years of friendship. Brian appeared nervous when he saw Dorothy arrive, but maintained the charade of normalcy as we settled at the dining table. I served coffee and remained silent until they both looked uncomfortable with my unusual quietness. "Is everything okay, honey?" Brian finally asked. "You seem distracted." I placed Teresa's folder in the center of the table and opened it to reveal the photographs of their affair. "I think you two have some explaining to do," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Their reactions were exactly as I had anticipated. First came shock, then denial, followed by blame. "This isn't what it looks like," Brian stammered, his face pale. Dorothy burst into tears. "Jane, please let me explain." "Explain what, Dorothy? How you've been sleeping with my husband for 3 years? Or how you've both been planning to take my retirement funds once everything was consolidated?" Their expressions confirmed everything. Brian's face hardened as he realized denial was pointless. "This isn't how we wanted you to find out," he said, reaching for Dorothy's hand across the table. "But yes, we've fallen in love. These things happen, Jane. After 45 years, people change." "These things happen," I repeated incredulously. "Betrayal by my husband and best friend was inevitable. Was that in our wedding vows? And I missed it." Dorothy wiped her tears, switching tactics. "We never meant to hurt you, Jane. It just happened. We fought it for so long." 3 years doesn't seem like fighting it very hard," I countered. "And discussing which of our homes you'd take after divorcing me doesn't suggest much reluctance either." Brian's expression changed from contrition to calculation so quickly it was almost comical. The literary professor who had wooed me with poetry in college was now all business. "Since you know everything, we might as well discuss this practically," he said. "I think a 50-50 split of assets is fair after 45 years. We can sell the Florida property and divide the proceeds." I laughed, actually laughed out loud at his audacity. 50-50. After you and Dorothy conspired to maximize your share, after you charged jewelry for her on our joint credit card, after you planned to wait until all our accounts were consolidated before leaving. Dorothy interjected. "Brian has contributed equally to your wealth, Jane. His professor's salary may not match your financial career, but he supported you while you built your career." This was rich coming from a woman who had listened to me for years about my career challenges, who knew exactly how hard I'd worked while also raising our children and managing our household. "And what exactly is your claim to my money, Dorothy? 45 years of friendship entitles you to my retirement savings." The confrontation continued for hours. At one point, Sarah and Michael arrived unexpectedly with the grandchildren for a surprise visit. They walked into a scene they couldn't possibly have imagined their father and their Aunt Dorothy sitting together opposite their mother amidst scattered photographs of their affair. Sarah immediately sent the children outside with her husband and confronted her father. "Dad, what is this? What have you done?" Michael picked up one of the photos and turned to Dorothy with disgust. "We considered you family. How could you do this to Mom?" Brian attempted to defend himself to our children, suggesting that marriage is complicated, and they couldn't understand the dynamics between adults. This only angered them further. "Don't you dare patronize us," Sarah snapped. "We understand betrayal perfectly well." By evening's end, Brian had moved from defiance to attempting negotiation. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours tomorrow," he said, gathering his keys. "I'll stay at Dorothy's tonight." "You mean at her friend's condo, where you've been meeting for your affair?" I corrected him. As they prepared to leave, Brian turned back. "I did love you, Jane. For most of our marriage, I truly did." "Save your revisions of history for your literature students," I replied. "They might actually believe them." After they left, I sat with my children who were still processing the shocking revelation. They offered unwavering support, assuring me they would stand by me through the divorce proceedings. "Dad will try to take everything," Michael warned. "He's always been methodical about getting what he wants." Little did he know that I had already begun forming my plan to protect what was rightfully mine. The day after the confrontation, I contacted Patricia Lawson, one of the top divorce attorneys in Chicago. As a financial advisor, I had referred several clients to her over the years and knew she was both ethical and formidable. "Jane, I'm so sorry about your situation," Patricia said after hearing my story. 45-year marriages don't usually end this way, but you were smart to come to me quickly. I provided her with the evidence Teresa had gathered and explained my concerns about Brian's intentions regarding our assets. He specifically mentioned waiting until our accounts were consolidated for retirement, I explained. I believe he was planning to gain control of as much as possible before filing for divorce. Patricia nodded gravely. Unfortunately, I see this pattern often with retirement age divorces. One spouse waits until accounts are merged and simplified before leaving, making it easier to claim 50% or more. Then came the moment to discuss my offshore accounts. I was nervous about revealing them even to my attorney. "Patricia, there's something else you should know. Over the years, I've established several offshore accounts that Brian doesn't know about." I explained the accounts, their origins from my personal earnings, and how they had been maintained separately throughout our marriage. Patricia's expression shifted from concern to cautious optimism. "This changes things significantly," she said. "In Illinois, any assets acquired during marriage are generally considered marital property subject to equitable distribution. However, if you can document that these accounts were established with your separate earnings and maintained separately without commingling with marital funds, we have a strong case for keeping them as your separate property." For the next several days, I gathered documentation proving the origins of these accounts, carefully tracing the funds back to my personal earnings. Meanwhile, Patricia filed for divorce, ensuring Brian was served papers at the university, a public setting that I knew would mortify the dignified professor. While organizing our financial records, I discovered something disturbing. Brian had been making substantial withdrawals from our joint savings account over the past year, totaling nearly $100,000. When I mentioned this to Patricia, she immediately brought in a forensic accountant. "We need to track where this money went," she explained. "If he's been hiding assets, the court will view that very unfavorably." The forensic accountant, Harold Jenkins, traced the withdrawals to a separate account Brian had opened at a different bank. From there, some funds had been used for expensive gifts for Dorothy weekend trips, and most alarmingly, a down payment on a beachfront property in North Carolina. "He's been establishing a nest egg for their new life," Harold explained, showing me documentation of the property purchase. "This is classic dissipation of marital assets." With this new evidence, Patricia assured me we had an even stronger case. Judges take a very dim view of spouses who hide or squander marital assets prior to divorce, especially when planning for a new relationship. Throughout this process, I found unexpected support from colleagues and friends. My former assistant, now a senior advisor herself, helped me review complex international tax documents related to my offshore accounts. A neighbor who had gone through a similar betrayal introduced me to her support group for women navigating midlife divorces. Most touching was the steadfast support from Sarah and Michael. They arranged their schedules to ensure one of them was always with me during important meetings or on particularly difficult days. "Mom, you've always been the backbone of this family," Sarah told me. "Now it's our turn to be yours." As the divorce proceedings moved forward, Brian became increasingly desperate. He made several attempts to access our remaining joint accounts, which I had already secured with Patricia's help. He sent pleading emails about needing funds for basic living expenses, trying to play on my sympathies. "Don't respond directly," Patricia advised. "Everything goes through me now." She arranged for reasonable temporary support payments that would maintain Brian's basic needs while protecting the bulk of our assets until the court made final determinations. What surprised me most during this period was my own resilience. After the initial shock and pain, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. For the first time in 45 years, I was making decisions solely for my own welfare, not considering Brian's preferences or needs. There was a strange liberation in that realization. "You're handling this better than many clients half your age," Patricia remarked during one of our meetings. "I've spent a lifetime helping others secure their financial futures," I replied. It turns out I was preparing for my own independence all along. 6 months after discovering the affair, we finally had our day in court. The divorce proceedings were scheduled for a full-day hearing due to the complexity of our financial situation and the contested nature of the asset division. I arrived with Patricia and our financial team dressed in a conservative navy suit that projected confidence and stability. Brian and his attorney, a young, aggressive man named Robert Daniels, were already seated on the opposite side. Dorothy sat in the gallery behind them, trying to appear supportive, but looking uncomfortable under the glares from Sarah and Michael, who had both taken time off work to attend. Judge Marilyn Carson, known for her no-nonsense approach to family court, presided. She began by reviewing the basic facts of the case: 45 years of marriage, 2 adult children, significant assets accumulated during the marriage, and allegations of infidelity and financial misconduct. The proceedings began with Brian's attorney arguing for a 50-50 split of all assets, emphasizing Brian's long career and support of my professional advancement. "Your Honor, Dr. Henderson's academic career and stable presence allowed Mrs. Henderson to pursue her more lucrative financial career. He deserves equal share in the fruits of that success." Patricia countered with evidence of Brian's affair with Dorothy and documentation of the funds he had secretly withdrawn and used for their benefit. "Your Honor, Dr. Henderson has already helped himself to nearly $100,000 of marital assets using joint funds to purchase property and gifts for his paramour. This represents clear dissipation of marital assets." Judge Carson frowned at this information, directing pointed questions at Brian about the withdrawals and property purchase. His attempts to justify these actions as pre-retirement planning fell flat. Then came the moment that changed everything. Patricia introduced evidence of my offshore accounts, explaining their separate nature and providing thorough documentation of their funding sources. The look on Brian's face was one I'll never forget. Complete shock, followed by anger, then panic as he realized these substantial assets might be beyond his reach. He leaned over to whisper urgently to his attorney, who appeared equally surprised. "Your Honor," Patricia continued, "these accounts were established by Mrs. Henderson using her separate earnings and have been maintained separately throughout the marriage without commingling with marital funds. Under Illinois law, they should remain her separate property." Brian's attorney objected strenuously. "Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing about these accounts. They represent hidden assets that should be considered marital property regardless of how they were established." Judge Carson reviewed the extensive documentation we had provided. "These accounts appear to be well documented, Mr. Daniels, and unlike your client's secret withdrawals, Mrs. Henderson has disclosed them fully to the court with complete transparency about their origins." Dorothy's expression in the gallery shifted from confusion to dismay as she began to understand the implications. The wealth she and Brian had anticipated splitting was significantly reduced by these separate accounts they hadn't known existed. The forensic accountant testified next, detailing Brian's financial misconduct and the property purchase in North Carolina. Judge Carson became increasingly stern as she questioned Brian directly about these actions. "Dr. Henderson, am I to understand that while still married and sharing financial accounts with your wife, you used joint funds to purchase property intended for your future with another woman?" Brian stammered through an unconvincing explanation, digging himself deeper with each attempt at justification. Sarah and Michael testified about their father's changed behavior over recent years and their mother's consistent support of the family throughout their lives, both emotionally and financially. "Mom managed our family finances, contributed the larger income, and still handled the majority of household and child-rearing responsibilities," Sarah testified. "Dad's current claims about equal contribution simply don't match the reality we witnessed growing up." By mid-afternoon, Judge Carson called a brief recess before delivering her ruling. During the break, I noticed Brian and Dorothy having a tense conversation in the hallway their earlier united front clearly strained by the revelations about my separate assets. When court resumed, Judge Carson delivered her ruling with decisive clarity. After reviewing all evidence presented, this court finds significant evidence of financial misconduct by Dr. Henderson, including dissipation of marital assets for the benefit of his extramarital relationship. Furthermore, Mrs. Henderson has provided substantial documentation supporting her claim that the offshore accounts represent separate property. She continued, "Therefore, the court rules that Mrs. Henderson shall retain full ownership of her separate accounts. The remaining marital assets, minus the amount already dissipated by Dr. Henderson, will be divided with 60% to Mrs. Henderson and 40% to Dr. Henderson. Additionally, Dr. Henderson must return the North Carolina property to the marital estate for sale with proceeds divided according to the same percentage." Brian's face reddened with anger, while his attorney whispered urgently in his ear, likely advising him to maintain composure before the judge. Dorothy sat stunned in the gallery, the reality of their financial situation clearly hitting home. As we left the courtroom, Brian attempted to approach me, but Sarah and Michael stepped between us. "I think you've said enough over the last 45 years, Dad," Michael said coldly. I watched as Brian and Dorothy walked away, their dream of a comfortable retirement, funded largely by my career earnings, now substantially diminished. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, I felt not just anger or hurt, but a sense of justice. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The pain hadn't completely disappeared, but it had evolved into something more like a dull ache that only occasionally flared into sharp remembrance. I sold our family home, unable to continue living, surrounded by 45 years of memories that now felt tainted. Instead, I purchased a beautiful waterfront condominium overlooking Lake Michigan, a place that was entirely mine, with no echoes of Brian or our shared past. The offshore accounts that had served as my financial insurance policy now funded a life built entirely on my own terms. I took my first solo international trip, spending 3 weeks exploring Italy, something Brian had always resisted because he preferred beach vacations. In Florence, standing before Botticelli's Birth of Venus at the Uffizi Gallery, I felt a profound sense of rebirth in my own life. My relationship with Sarah and Michael deepened in unexpected ways. Without the dynamics of their father present, we discovered new dimensions to our relationships. Sarah and I began a tradition of monthly cooking classes together, while Michael introduced me to hiking, a passion I never knew I might enjoy. "You seem younger, Mom," Sarah observed during one of our cooking sessions. "More vibrant somehow." "Freedom looks good on you," Michael added, after we completed a challenging trail in a state park. My grandchildren adapted to the new family configuration with the resilience of youth. I made sure to create special experiences with them that were entirely separate from the memories they had of visiting Grandma and Grandpa's house. Emma and Jack became my eager assistants in container gardening on my condo balcony, while little Lily and I developed a shared love of the children's section at the Chicago Art Institute. As for Brian and Dorothy, their great love story didn't have the fairy tale ending they had anticipated. Through mutual friends, I learned they had separated after only 8 months together. The financial reality of their situation had apparently created significant strain. Without access to the full marital assets they had counted on, Brian was forced to continue teaching well past his planned retirement age. Dorothy the Herd had moved to Milwaukee for a curator position at a smaller museum, a step down from her previous role. The friendship network we had shared largely sided with me after learning the details of their betrayal, leaving them socially isolated. I ran into them only once, about 10 months after the divorce, at a restaurant downtown. I was having dinner with a group from my divorce support group when they walked in. The momentary panic I felt at seeing them quickly subsided, replaced by an odd sense of detachment, as if they were merely characters from a previous chapter of my life. Brian looked noticeably older, the stress of the past year evident in deeper lines on his face. Dorothy seemed uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the restaurant as if searching for an escape route. When Brian finally approached my table, his attempt at casual conversation fell flat. "You look well, Jane," he said awkwardly. "I am well," I replied simply before turning back to my friends. That brief exchange confirmed what I already knew. The power they once held over my emotions had diminished considerably. They were just people now, not the central figures in my personal tragedy. My healing journey wasn't linear. There were still days when anger bubbled up unexpectedly or when loneliness felt overwhelming. On those days, I allowed myself to feel the emotions fully, no longer afraid they would consume me. The most significant change came through establishing the Women's Financial Independence Foundation, a nonprofit I created using a portion of my funds. The foundation provided financial literacy education and small business grants for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or widowhood. Working with these women, many of whom had stories more challenging than my own, provided perspective and purpose. During one of our foundation workshops, a participant asked what advice I would give to women in long-term marriages. "Love completely, but protect yourself wisely," I told her. "Trust should be accompanied by financial literacy and independence." Through the foundation, I formed friendships with women who truly understood my experience. Elizabeth, a 72-year-old former teacher whose husband left her after 50 years for a younger colleague, became particularly close. We often joked about forming a Golden Girls household in our 80s, surrounded by books, art, and absolutely no deceitful men. The final step in my healing came when I realized I no longer defined myself as Brian's ex-wife or Dorothy's former friend. Those relationships had shaped decades of my life, but they no longer determined my identity. I was simply Jane, a woman discovering who she was and what she wanted at 67. On the 1-year anniversary of my divorce, I hosted a liberation celebration at my condo for my children, grandchildren, and new friends. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across my new home, Sarah proposed a toast. To Mom, who taught us that it's never too late for a new beginning and that the strongest security comes from within. Looking around at the faces of those who truly loved and supported me, I felt genuine gratitude for the painful journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that once seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of a more authentic life. The offshore accounts had protected my financial future, but reclaiming my sense of self-worth and independence had been the true victory. In losing a husband and friend who betrayed me, I found a strength and community I never knew I needed. It's ironic that I now feel grateful for that betrayal. It gave me a new life, one truly my own. If you've experienced betrayal from someone you trusted, remember that what feels like an ending may actually be your beginning. I'd love to hear your stories of resilience in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of overcoming life's challenges, and share with anyone who might need to hear that there's always a path forward, even after 45 years of deception.